October 1944, late evening at Trent Park, and General der Infanterie Dietrich von Koltitz sits in an elegant drawing room, warming his hands by the fireplace, discussing with his fellow captured generals the recent failed assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler. What Koltitz cannot possibly know, what no German officer imprisoned in this luxurious North London estate could imagine, is that hidden inside the very fireplace he sits beside, concealed behind the ornate light fittings above his head, embedded in the skirting boards beneath his feet, are 88 A-pressure microphones, picking up every word he speaks. In the basement below, 3 rooms away from the comfortable sitting areas where Wehrmacht generals play billiards and sip whiskey, a Jewish refugee named Fritz Lustig sits with headphones pressed to his ears, frantically transcribing every word of the conversation, writing in bright red pen when he hears the word atrocity, knowing that what he is documenting will prove that the German military knew about and participated in the mass murder of Jews across Europe. The British intelligence operation codenamed the M Room, where M stands for mic'd, represents perhaps the most elaborate and successful deception of World War II, an operation so secret that even Winston Churchill was kept in the dark about its full extent. And over the next 3 years, from 1942 until 1945, this bugging operation will extract from captured German generals the secrets of Hitler's V-2 rocket program, the locations of experimental weapons facilities, the internal divisions within the Wehrmacht High Command, and the first eyewitness accounts of the Holocaust, spoken by the very officers who participated in it. The transformation of Trent Park from an aristocratic country estate into a gilded cage for Nazi generals begins in 1939, when British intelligence, specifically MI6 spy master Thomas Kendrick, requisitions the property for what official documents describe vaguely as special purposes. The house itself, a magnificent Georgian mansion set on 320 hectares of parkland in North London, had been the property of Sir Philip Sassoon, a wealthy aristocrat who had hosted everyone from Winston Churchill to Charlie Chaplin in its elegant rooms before the war. Kendrick sees something that military planners had not yet fully appreciated, understanding that captured enemy officers, when treated well and made comfortable, when given the illusion of gentlemanly treatment that their rank supposedly deserves, will talk among themselves with a freedom they would never display during formal interrogations. The concept proves so revolutionary that it goes against every instinct of British military doctrine, which calls for strict treatment of prisoners, minimal comfort, and aggressive questioning to extract information. But Kendrick, who had run intelligence operations in Vienna before the war and understood the German military mind better than most British officers, convinces his superiors to try something different, to create an environment where German generals would feel so secure, so convinced of British stupidity and hospitality, that they would reveal secrets they would take to their graves under torture. The installation of the bugging system at Trent Park represents a technical achievement that remains impressive even by modern standards, with hundreds of meters of lead-lined wire threaded through hollow spaces behind elegant wooden panels, snaked through false ceilings and beneath floorboards, embedded in walls and concealed in decorative elements throughout the house. The microphones themselves, 88A pressure devices, sensitive enough to pick up whispered conversations, are hidden in fireplaces where generals warm themselves on cold English evenings, in light fittings that illuminate their evening card games, behind skirting boards in bedrooms where they discuss the war before sleeping, even in the billiard table where they pass time between interrogations that they believe have already concluded. The first high-value prisoner arrives at Trent Park in May 1942, a German general captured in North Africa, who expects to be sent to a standard prisoner of war camp after initial questioning. Instead, he finds himself deposited in what resembles a gentleman's club, complete with private rooms for senior officers, sitting areas with comfortable furniture, a library stocked with German language books borrowed from the abandoned German embassy in London, and orderlies who serve meals with an attentiveness usually reserved for hotel guests rather than enemy prisoners. The psychological impact of this treatment cannot be overstated, because German military culture places enormous emphasis on rank, status, and the proper treatment of officers, and the British are deliberately exploiting this cultural expectation to lower the prisoner's guard. Within weeks, the captured general is discussing operational details with newly arrived prisoners, sharing his analysis of German military capabilities, complaining about Hitler's strategic decisions, all while Thomas Kendrick's secret listeners in the basement record every word. The success of this initial operation leads to rapid expansion, with 2 additional facilities, Latimer House and Wilton Park in Buckinghamshire, established using the same model, creating a network of bugged stately homes that will eventually process over 10,000 German prisoners of war during the course of the war. Trent Park itself, designated as the special quarters for the highest-ranking officers, will house 59 German generals by war's end, representing a significant portion of Hitler's senior military leadership, all of them living in comfort, while unknowingly providing British intelligence with the most sensitive secrets of the Third Reich. The secret listeners who staff the M rooms represent one of the war's most profound ironies. German-speaking Jewish refugees who fled Nazi persecution, now employed by British intelligence to spy on the very officers who implemented Hitler's genocidal policies. Fritz Lustig, born in Berlin and baptized Protestant but with Jewish family members, escaped to England in April 1939 and joined the British Army's Royal Pioneer Corps before being recruited for intelligence work because he spoke both German and English fluently. Ernst Lederer, originally from the Sudetenland, serves not just as a listener but as a stool pigeon, an undercover operative who dresses in German officer's uniform and mingles with the captured generals, posing as a fellow prisoner while steering conversations toward topics that British intelligence needs information about. These refugees, many of them highly educated men who had been professionals in Germany before the Nazis stripped them of their citizenship and livelihoods, work in shifts of 6 in the 3M rooms, wearing headphones connected to the hidden microphones throughout the house, transcribing conversations in real time, translating technical terminology and military jargon, double-checking transcripts for accuracy before passing them to interrogators and intelligence analysts. The emotional toll of this work proves devastating for some listeners, who must sit for hours hearing German officers casually discuss atrocities, listening to generals argue about whether the mass murder of Jews was militarily necessary, transcribing eyewitness accounts of massacres delivered in the same tone one might use to describe a training exercise. But these listeners understand that their work directly contributes to defeating the regime that murdered their families, that every piece of intelligence they extract potentially saves Allied lives, and they perform their duties with a professionalism that British intelligence officers frequently cite in their reports as exemplary. The elaborate theatre that Kendrick stages to maintain the deception requires attention to detail that would impress any Hollywood production designer, with every element carefully calculated to reinforce the Germans' belief that they are being treated as military gentlemen by British officers who respect their status. Thomas Kendrick hires a Scottish aristocrat named Lord Aberfeldy to serve as the prisoner's welfare officer, introducing him to the captured generals as a cousin of King George VI, who has been personally ordered by His Majesty to ensure that captured German commanders receive treatment appropriate to their rank. The Germans, many of them from aristocratic Prussian families who place enormous value on lineage and royal connections, are enormously flattered by this attention, believing that the British establishment recognises them as members of a military elite that transcends national boundaries. What none of them know is that Lord Aberfeldy is actually an MI-19 agent named Ian Munro, an intelligence officer whose aristocratic bearing and knowledge of German military culture make him perfect for the role of flattering German egos while extracting information. The prisoners are allowed regular walks in the extensive grounds of Trent Park, escorted trips to London where they shop at Harrods and dine at exclusive restaurants, visits from tailors who press their uniforms and maintain their military appearance, even Christmas dinners complete with traditional German foods and decorations. One German general, so convinced of British hospitality and dim-wittedness, writes in the letter to his family that he wishes they could be at Trent Park to enjoy the lifestyle, while another tells his fellow prisoners that the British are ultimately too stupid to bug their conversations, a statement recorded by the very microphones he insists don't exist. The intelligence gathered from the bugged conversations proves so valuable that it changes British military planning in fundamental ways, providing information that could not be obtained through any other source, including code-breaking or aerial reconnaissance. In early 1943, vague conversations among prisoners about Hitler's secret weapon reach the secret listeners, leading to intensified efforts to discover what new technology the Germans are developing. Over the following months, as more captured Luftwaffe pilots and Wehrmacht officers arrive at the bugging facilities, the fragments of information coalesce into a clearer picture of a rocket program, based at a secret facility called Peenemünde on Germany's Baltic coast. The conversations reveal not just the existence of this program, but technical details about the rocket's range, payload, and guidance systems, information that allows Allied scientists to estimate the threat these weapons pose to British cities. On August 17, 1943, the Royal Air Force launches Operation Crossbow, a massive bombing raid on Peenemünde that leaves the experimental station in ruins, destroying test facilities, killing key scientists and technicians, and delaying the V1 and V2 rocket programs by an estimated 6 months. This delay proves crucial because it means that the first V1 rocket does not strike London until the week after D-Day, when the Allied invasion of France is already underway and the strategic situation has fundamentally shifted. British intelligence chiefs, reviewing the impact of the Trent Park operation, conclude that the intelligence on Peenemünde alone justified the entire expense and effort of the bugging program. But this represents only one of dozens of major intelligence coups achieved through eavesdropping on German prisoners. The conversations recorded at Trent Park reveal the deep divisions within the German military, exposing the tensions between officers who remain fanatically loyal to Hitler and those who have come to believe that Germany has already lost the war and that continuing to fight only prolongs suffering. After the failed assassination attempt on Hitler in July 1944, when Wehrmacht officers led by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg attempt to kill the Führer and negotiate peace with the Western Allies, the captured generals at Trent Park discuss the plot with a passion that reveals how fractured German military leadership has become. The pro-Nazi generals, men who still believe in Hitler's vision and Germany's ultimate victory, express outrage at what they view as treason, arguing that the plotters deserve the brutal executions that Hitler orders for them. The anti-Nazi generals, many of them professional soldiers who view Hitler as an Austrian corporal who has destroyed the Wehrmacht through his incompetent meddling in military operations, speak with barely concealed satisfaction that someone finally tried to kill the madman. General Dietrich von Scholtitz, who surrendered Paris to the Free French rather than destroy the city as Hitler ordered, tells his fellow prisoners in October 1944 that we all share the guilt, that the military went along with Hitler's insanity and half took the Nazis seriously, instead of saying, "To hell with you and your stupid nonsense." This admission, recorded by the secret listeners and transcribed in multiple copies, provides British intelligence with invaluable insight into German military morale and the willingness of some senior officers to contemplate ending the war through negotiation, rather than fighting to the last man as Hitler demands. Perhaps the most shocking intelligence extracted through the bugging operation concerns not military matters, but crimes against humanity, as captured German officers discuss among themselves their participation in and knowledge of the Holocaust. The British listeners, many of them Jewish refugees whose families have been murdered in the very operations being discussed, must maintain professional detachment while transcribing conversations where German generals casually mention mass shootings, describe witnessing executions of Jewish civilians, and debate whether killing Jews serves any military purpose. A young German sailor, captured after his U-boat was sunk, describes to his fellow prisoners a massacre he witnessed in Lithuania, saying, "Believe me, if you had seen it, it would have made you shudder." His words preserved on tape as evidence that even junior enlisted men knew what was happening to Europe's Jews. A Luftwaffe pilot recalls stumbling with friends upon the scene of a mass shooting near Lviv, bodies piled in a ravine, and grimly suggests that we shall have to pay for that, understanding even then that these actions constitute war crimes, for which Germany will be held accountable. General Edwin Graf von Rothkirch Untrack discusses his time in occupied Poland with other generals, describing how Wehrmacht soldiers were not just witnesses to the Holocaust, but active participants, invited by SS units to take part in mass shootings, provided with alcohol to make the killing easier to stomach. These transcripts, tens of thousands of pages documenting German military knowledge of and participation in genocide, prove invaluable after the war when German military leaders attempt to claim that the Wehrmacht was innocent, that only the SS committed atrocities, that the army knew nothing about the concentration camps and killing operations. The Trent Park transcripts demolish these lies, providing irrefutable evidence that the German military establishment knew exactly what was happening, and in many cases actively participated. The operational security surrounding the bugging program remained so tight that even Winston Churchill, Britain's Prime Minister and the man theoretically in charge of all British intelligence operations, is kept partially in the dark about the full extent of the program. Churchill receives intelligence reports based on information gleaned from Trent Park, but he is not told the source of this intelligence because intelligence chiefs fear that the Prime Minister's legendary inability to keep secrets might compromise the operation. At one point, Churchill becomes so impressed by the quality of intelligence coming from prisoner interrogations that he wants to personally question some of the captured generals, a request that sends Thomas Kendrick into a panic, because allowing the Prime Minister to interact with prisoners would inevitably reveal something about the bugging operation. British intelligence must delicately convince Churchill that his presence would make the prisoners suspicious and ruin the careful psychological operation designed to keep them talking freely. Even after the war ends, the British government maintains absolute secrecy about the bugging program, with all personnel involved sworn to never discuss their work, and the transcripts and recordings classified at the highest levels of secrecy. The secret listeners are told that revealing anything about their wartime service will result in prosecution under the Official Secrets Act, and most of them maintain their silence for decades, taking their stories to their graves. It is only in the late 1990s, more than 50 years after the war's end, that the British government quietly begins declassifying some of the Trent Park files, allowing historians to piece together the full story of this extraordinary intelligence operation. The Stool Pigeon program, where undercover British agents pose as German prisoners to steer conversations and extract specific information, represents perhaps the most audacious element of the entire deception, requiring actors who can convincingly portray German officers in both bearing and technical knowledge. Ernst Lederer, the Czechoslovakian Jewish refugee who serves as one of the most successful stool pigeons, must maintain his cover constantly, speaking only German, demonstrating detailed knowledge of Wehrmacht organisation and operations, expressing appropriate attitudes about the war and the Nazi regime, all while subtly guiding conversations toward topics that British intelligence needs information about. If a German general becomes suspicious of a stool pigeon's identity or motivation, the entire operation at Trent Park could be compromised, with word spreading among prisoners that British intelligence is running an elaborate deception. The stool pigeons are trained in special schools, where they learn not just German military procedures, but the psychological techniques for building rapport with prisoners, for flattering egos, for expressing doubts or concerns that encourage others to open up. They are provided with detailed cover stories complete with false service records and fabricated explanations for how they were captured. Stories that must stand up to questioning from suspicious generals who might test their bona fides. Some stool pigeons pose not as German officers, but as members of the British aristocracy with Nazi sympathies, claiming to represent a fifth column within Britain that supports Germany's war aims. A fiction that appeals to German generals' belief that elements of the British establishment secretly admire Hitler and would welcome a negotiated peace. The intelligence flowing from Trent Park influences not just British military operations, but American ones as well, as the United States sets up its own version of the program at Fort Hunt in Virginia, designated by the cryptic address P.O. Box 1142. From 1943 through 1946, over 3,400 German prisoners, including 15 generals, are processed at Fort Hunt, subjected to the same combination of comfortable treatment and hidden surveillance that proves so effective in Britain. American interrogators, many of them Jewish refugees who fled Germany and now serve in US Army intelligence, use psychological pressure and stool pigeons to extract information about German weapons programs, military operations, and industrial capacity. The intelligence gathered at Fort Hunt leads to the bombing of German rocket production facilities, the interdiction of a submarine carrying uranium, and disassembled jet fighters to Japan, and detailed understanding of German order of battle that proves crucial for planning the D-Day invasion. The American program operates independently of the British one, but shares the same fundamental insight, that treating prisoners well and creating an environment where they feel comfortable talking produces better intelligence than aggressive interrogation or torture. This proves particularly important after the war, when both British and American intelligence begin recruiting German scientists and military officers for service in what will become the Cold War against the Soviet Union, using information gathered through bugging operations to identify which Germans are worth recruiting and which remain dangerously committed to Nazi ideology. The final months of the war bring a flood of captured German generals to Trent Park as Allied armies sweep across Germany, overwhelming Wehrmacht forces and capturing entire army groups. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, one of Germany's most senior military commanders, arrives at Trent Park in March 1945, still wearing his full-dress uniform and carrying himself with the bearing of a man who believes his rank entitles him to respect, even in defeat. Von Rundstedt quickly becomes the informal leader of the prisoner community at Trent Park, hosting discussions in his heavily bugged bedroom, where other generals gather around the fireplace to debate why Germany lost the war, whether Hitler's interference in military operations doomed the Wehrmacht, and what the future holds for Germany under Allied occupation. These conversations, recorded and transcribed by the secret listeners, provide British intelligence with invaluable insight into how Germany's military elite understands their defeat, what lessons they believe should be learned, and how they rationalise their participation in a regime that committed unprecedented atrocities. Von Rundstedt, upon his release after the war, writes a letter to Captain Hamley, one of the British interpreters at Trent Park, thanking him for the courtesy shown to German officers during their captivity, apparently never suspecting that every word he spoke was recorded and analysed. This letter, preserved in British intelligence archives, demonstrates how completely the deception succeeded, with even the most senior German commanders convinced that British hospitality reflected respect for military professionalism rather than a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation. The discovery of the original wiring at Trent Park decades after the war, during renovation of the mansion, provides physical evidence of the elaborate nature of the bugging operation and helps explain why German prisoners never found the microphones. The wires are discovered deeply embedded in hollow spaces behind wooden panels, running through false ceilings and beneath floorboards, threaded through walls in ways that would have required destroying the house's elegant interior to discover. The largest bedroom on the first floor, believed to have been occupied by General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, who surrendered in North Africa in May 1943 with 350,000 men, contains what renovation workers describe as the most heavily bugged room in the entire house, with multiple microphones and thousands of meters of wiring converging on the space where von Arnim held court as the self-appointed camp leader. In the bathroom adjacent to this bedroom, workers find the main artery of the bugging operation, a deep cavity containing the connection point for wires running throughout the house, all leading down to the 3 M rooms in the basement, where the secret listeners worked in shifts around the clock. The sophistication of the installation suggests that British intelligence spared no expense in creating a surveillance system that would be virtually undetectable, and the fact that thousands of German prisoners passed through Trent Park over 3 years without a single one conclusively discovering the microphones testifies to the skill of the engineers and technicians who installed the system. The human stories of individual secret listeners illuminate the personal dimension of an operation, usually discussed only in terms of intelligence value and military impact. Fritz Lustig, the Berlin-born refugee who escaped to England in 1939, spends the war years sitting in the basement of Trent Park with headphones pressed to his ears, transcribing conversations in German and English, flagging important intelligence for his supervisors, and occasionally writing the word atrocity in bright red pen when he hears something particularly horrifying. After the war, Lustig marries Susan Cohn, a female Jewish refugee who worked at Trent Park, helping with translation and clerical work, their wedding taking place 1 month after WWII Day, in a celebration that brings together many of the secret listeners who served together. Lustig lives to age 93, spending most of his post-war life maintaining silence about his wartime service, only speaking publicly about his role in the final years of his life, when the government declassifies parts of the operation. He tells interviewers that listening to German generals discuss atrocities did not bother him, because he understood that documenting their admissions was crucial for ensuring that the world would know what happened, that the perpetrators could not later deny their crimes. Another secret listener, a woman who publishes a memoir titled A War Bride's Story late in her life, describes the psychological challenges of working at Trent Park, the stress of knowing that missing an important piece of intelligence might cost Allied lives, the horror of hearing German officers casually discuss mass murder, the satisfaction of knowing that her work directly contributed to Germany's defeat. The strategic impact of the Trent Park operation extends far beyond any single piece of intelligence, fundamentally altering how both British and American intelligence services approach the interrogation of prisoners and the gathering of human intelligence. The success of the bugging program demonstrates that psychological manipulation and careful staging can produce better results than coercion or torture, that creating an environment where prisoners feel comfortable enough to talk freely generates more accurate intelligence than aggressive questioning that puts prisoners on guard. This lesson influences intelligence doctrine throughout the Cold War and beyond, with Western intelligence agencies generally favouring subtle approaches over harsh interrogation methods, understanding that information obtained through force is often unreliable because prisoners will say whatever they think their captors want to hear. The recognition that Jewish refugees with intimate knowledge of German language and culture make ideal intelligence personnel leads to the recruitment of thousands of refugees into post-war intelligence services, their language skills and cultural understanding proving invaluable for monitoring Soviet activities in occupied Germany. The techniques pioneered at Trent Park, including the use of stool pigeons, the creation of comfortable environments for prisoners, and the systematic bugging of living spaces, become standard practice in intelligence operations, with modern intelligence agencies using similar methods when dealing with high-value detainees who possess information worth the effort of an elaborate deception. The story of what happened when the Nazis spoke and the Allies listened stands as one of World War II's most remarkable intelligence successes, an operation that combined technical innovation, psychological insight, and human courage to extract from captured German generals secrets they never intended to reveal. The elegant rooms of Trent Park, where Wehrmacht field marshals sipped whiskey and played billiards while hidden microphones recorded their every word, represent a kind of theatre of deception, where British intelligence staged an elaborate performance designed to convince the audience that nothing unusual was happening. The Jewish refugees who fled Nazi persecution and found themselves listening through headphones to German generals discuss murdering their families, who transcribed these conversations with professional accuracy while suppressing their own trauma and rage, embody the moral complexity of intelligence work, where the ends must justify means that might otherwise seem intolerable. The 100 or so secret listeners who worked in shifts at Trent Park and other bugging facilities, most of them maintaining absolute silence about their wartime service for decades, deserve recognition as unsung heroes whose contribution to Allied victory remains largely unknown even now. The thousands of pages of transcripts, the hundreds of hours of recordings, the detailed reports that British and American intelligence analysts compiled from bugged conversations, together constitute a unique historical archive, documenting not just military secrets, but the mindset of Hitler's generals, their knowledge of and attitude toward Nazi crimes, their internal debates about strategy and politics, all preserved in their own words, spoken in moments when they believed themselves safe from surveillance. When Field Marshal von Rundstedt writes his thank you letter to his British hosts, when German generals conclude that the British are too stupid to bug them, when captured officers discuss military secrets and war crimes with the same casual attitude they might discuss the weather, they provide involuntary testimony to the effectiveness of the most elaborate and successful wiretap operation in history, an operation that helped win the war by turning the enemy's own words against them.